Welcome to the Homefront Podcast, hosted by me, Becca Bookman. The Homefront Podcast aims to introduce you to the people, initiatives, and ideas shaping Israeli society from within. It was born from my experience living through war in Israel. I was having dinner with friends one night, and it struck me. We hear a lot about the government, we hear a lot about the army, and we hear a lot about the hostage crisis. Three very important topics. There are also important things happening in civil society, and that's what me and my friends were discussing. Through this show, I hope to introduce you to many of them and others who are having an impact in Israel. On today's episode, we'll be meeting someone who can give us an overview of what's been happening in civil society. So I'm very excited to welcome to the show Maayan Schoen. She is the Chief of Staff for the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum.
Thank you so much for having me, Becca.
How are you doing today?
I'm so glad to be here and part of this wonderful initiative, and I'm hoping to be able to use it as a chance to spotlight some of the incredible work and people that I was fortunate to be able to see throughout the many months of the war we've had so far.
How is your Zionism doing today?
Oh, I love that question, and it's the kind of thing that can probably change every day of the war. I would say that during the war, my Zionism has shifted a little bit from one that's maybe somewhat abstract, a Zionism of ideas, to one that's very concrete. I think it was a little bit hard for me, even though, of course, this is the nature of every war, but it was hard for me to think about all of the beautiful people who have been dying as though they've just been dying for an idea. So I've shifted to thinking about, rather than, an abstract idea about a land of our own, I'm thinking about the very villages that people came from that were destroyed, and people who are living in Jerusalem or different places around the country now. Instead of thinking about just Jewish peoplehood, I'm thinking about the people who I meet every day. And so with that in mind, when I made Aliyah December 20th this year, I had this necklace that I'm wearing right now engraved to say, Yesusu midbar v'tzia v'tagel arava v'tifrach kechavat salat, which is a verse from the book of Yeshayahu and his vision of redemption one day. And it means, it speaks about the desert will exalt and will blossom again, the arid southern lands. And this was important to me because, again, I was thinking about the real concrete, what will happen to these people who needed to be evacuated from their homes. And this past Friday, I was babysitting for a family I've become very close with who is evacuated from Sderot and is now living in Jerusalem. And on Friday, they told me that they're looking forward to moving back to their home in the south, in Sderot, in the coming weeks. So my Zionism has, just over this past weekend, because of that story, really been strengthened and is feeling good.
It sounds like in a time of so much darkness and challenges, you've been able to really lean into your Zionism and find something bright to hold on to.
Oh, absolutely. And when the way that you're thinking about your Zionism is from the perspective of being here, meeting incredible people every day, dear friends who have been widowed at the age of 23, funerals that I've been to, I work at a seminary, so seeing young girls who are 18 there choose to stay in Israel and babysit and make meals for women whose husbands are fighting and that sort of thing. The kinds of very negative but very abstract language, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism that we encounter on social media, it only serves to strengthen me because you're speaking about something abstract and it just can't touch me, when I'm meeting real people every single day. And that's my Zionism.
Let's talk about the people and the civilians and the home front. And I'd like us to start by really zooming out and going back to October 7th and thinking from October 7th to today, what's been happening in the home front. So just to give people who are listening a little bit of an idea, on October 7th, we know about the horrible atrocities that happened, and we know there was a huge mobilization of IDF forces. But what I think a lot of us here and people abroad may not fully appreciate, I don't even know if I fully appreciate it to the fullest extent, is the mobilization of civilians that started on October 7th and is still going until today. So can you walk us through a little bit of what you saw those early days and how it's been progressing?
From those first days, we saw a couple different kinds of mass mobilizations that were each just incredible in their own ways. Many of them have continued to this day. Some of them were only relevant in those first days. So, for example, I was just thinking about this incredible story that I heard, and this seems like it's more on the military side of things, but this person who I met was acting in his capacity as a civilian. So I'll just share this story of a man in his 70s who I had the privilege to meet towards the beginning of the war, who got a call. He was living in Beersheba, which is in the south, not exactly where the attacks happened. He got a call early in the morning, 6 or 7 a.m., about what was going on. And he jumped in his car with his personal weapon and made it to a kibbutz that was under severe attack from at least 50 terrorists, was part of an incredible team that held off the terrorists, and only 6 people from that kibbutz, which is 6 too many, but only 6 people in comparison to other places that didn't have as quick of a response, were lost from that kibbutz on that day because of the response that he was part of. But in that response, he was shot in the leg. This is a man in his 70s, okay? He drove himself to the hospital, had his leg stitched up, and left within half an hour. Returned to the battlefield, looking around for where he could be of service, and then also helped defend one of the military bases there. So, of course, like I said, that is more on the military side of things, but acting in his capacity as a civilian and just showing that everybody was just showing up in any way that they could. But when I think back on those early days, I think about how everybody just asked themselves, from my position as whether you're a 10-year-old at home, seeing what's going on around you. Maybe your mom or dad was called in. Maybe you had a friend who something happened to, or maybe not. Maybe you just understand what's happening around you. Or an adult, let's say you're a social worker, this or that. Everybody asks themselves, what can I do from my position to help? And everybody found something that was in their skill set, and in their possessions, in their world, some way to help before any kind of official initiatives were organized. So, for example, people would put out calls on WhatsApp. There's a pregnant woman who's in from Ashdod, and she only has the clothes on her back. Does anybody have size whatever sweater to give her? Because also keep in mind, people were coming from the south in October, where they had not yet needed to pull out their winter coats, and then they were coming, many of them, to Jerusalem, where it was a little bit chillier. Okay, so one of the first things that happened is people reaching into their own closets, pulling out their clothing, driving to whatever hotel or location they could to give people the clothes off their backs that they knew they would not be seeing again. That was one incredible thing. There was cooking happening from the first days. People were cooking meals for literally hundreds, whether it was because we were hearing that soldiers didn't have enough provisions wherever they were, or didn't have enough socks. Again, so you go into your drawer and you pull out your own socks and you find somebody who's driving and you go, or the families, the thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of families who were suddenly living in Jerusalem with many of them with nothing except whatever had been in their car when they jumped in. So cooking, babysitting, and then things started like social workers were providing any kind of trauma support that they could, and teachers or anybody with the capacity to teach were showing up at the hotels where refugees were staying. And even before we started formal school, people were just running activities all day long. So those were some of the many kinds of initiatives going on in the first days. I work at a seminary, as I mentioned, so it's 18-year-old, 19-year-old girls from America, England, Canada, and they were not allowed to go more than a 10-minute radius from the seminary in those first days. And so they said, well, what can we do from here? So besides for praying and reciting psalms and many kinds of spiritual fortifications, they learned how to tie tzitzit, which is a religious garment that I think the majority of the army started wearing and felt like it was a layer of armor, it was a layer of protection. Okay, so these girls were tying a very special formation of knots have to be tied, so they became experts. They learned how to tie those in army green. And they did whatever they could from inside the building. And since then, just to describe, I mean, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of initiatives. I'll describe some of them, and then I'll tell you about the Jerusalem Civil Command Center, which was a home for many of these things. So we've heard the call from all different parts of the community about what's needed, and there's not a single call that I've seen unanswered. So, for example, farmers in the South have lost all of their workers, and they've put out a call. I don't even think in their wildest dreams they were expecting the answer to the call that they ended up getting. I think farmers were just looking like, I think they figured we will lose this year's crop, but we need to be in a place where we can plant next year's crop. We can't let this ruin us for 2 years, not only financially, but if Israel, the South produces 60% of Israel's produce. And it is a very tremendous and fortunate thing that as a country isolated in the way we are in our part of the world, that we're able to provide so much of our own food. Okay, so in one instant, it looked like that would be totally kaput for years, besides for the financial ruin, of course, that these farmers would personally go through. Okay, so mechinas, which is preparatory army academies for 18-year-old Israelis, yeshivas, seminaries, like I mentioned, and high schoolers from all over the country were a tremendous resource. I think perhaps feeling this, I can't quite do the army yet, but I'm capable and I'm of age. And so before we were allowed to get in volunteers from abroad, which has also been a tremendous resource, all of these places that I just mentioned were going and volunteering, picking oranges. I was part of a little group that went, and we were taught to defend cauliflower. So it's not planting the cauliflower. It's actually about snapping the leaves to cover the top of the cauliflower to protect it from the sun. So we were doing all sorts of things, bringing manpower. I know that we didn't necessarily equal the skill of the workers that we were replacing, but in spirit, I know that those kinds of delegations brought a lot of fortification to the farmers, and it was also practical support as well. There's been mass trauma support offerings, people from all over the world who are trained in psychology and social work and any kind of trauma support have been offering free resources, not only to evacuees and refugees, but also to everybody who's in Israel and is affected by this war in some way. There have been initiatives to support spouses of people who have been called up to the reserves, to support children in different ways. At Hanukkah, there were present drives for these children. I attended a mass bat mitzvah that was made for the girls of Sderot who have missed their bat mitzvah celebrations that they anticipated, and it was just a gorgeous ceremony at the Begin Museum. They had their hair done. They were given gorgeous dresses. There were stations that were fun to play at. So, I mean, I've just given a very small selection of some of the amazing initiatives I've seen, but the Jerusalem Civil Command Center was a hub in those early days, and it continues to be a hub of so many different kinds of resources, and it was an incredible thing to witness. There were at least 2,000 full-time volunteers there and 2 shifts a day, and it was housed at the Nissan Nativ Acting Center, so they had this tremendous facility, and from there they were collecting supplies for soldiers. They were collecting supplies for families that were displaced, things from coffee and deodorant and diapers to other special items that people might request, and this command center would find the way to get it for them. And then also trauma support. There was a hotline that took just any kind of request that might come in during the day. Where do we send our kids to school? Is there somebody who can drive us to get X, Y, or Z, etc.? And that is an incredible place that transcended all political tribalism. You know, the person running it, Adi Schwartz, one of the people running it, so he's the head of the Hito Arut party. I work for the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, who came from a different party than him, and they were both acting in their capacity as strong members of civil society out of recognition that that is the heart of Israeli power, and the Israeli people and the Jewish people is civil society. And government took a little while to catch up, and that's understandable because of bureaucracy. Not that it's understandable. We all knew it would happen like that, right? And then one other initiative that I'll mention is there were a place where the government stepped in some ways, and then civil society did the rest. There were tens of thousands of displaced families who found themselves in Jerusalem in the day and days after October 7th with nowhere to live. So the government made many hotels available, some of which were well suited for hosting families and others less so. And then there were just these amazing initiatives asking people to open up their own homes, whether they had a spare bedroom for a temporary kind of stay, and I was part of the deputy mayor's program on this, also a program appealing to people abroad who have apartments in Israel that they're not currently in, asking them to open their homes. So that project was called Open Doors. And it was just, I want to highlight the way that people looked in, what do I have to offer, as I said. So Sharon Turin is an incredible high-end architect and interior designer. And she was one of the first people. She was one of the go-to people. The Jerusalem Civil Command Center was calling her because she was turning to her personal clients whose homes she had decorated, asking them, would you mind opening your home for this stranger you don't know who's been displaced from the South? And she was wildly successful. It was just incredible to put herself and her business on the line like that, opening up to her clients. So she was a huge part of my initiative with the deputy mayor that was also run by my dear friend Yehuda Tarragon. And through that work, we encountered City of Gold, congregations such as Nitzanim and Eretz Chamda who are running similar initiatives. Put people in houses, and then what do we do with them? How do we follow up to make sure they have groceries, supplies that they need, they're settling in well to the neighborhood, are their neighbors looking after them, that sort of thing. So I know I've said a lot of things. It's a sprinkling of some of the incredible initiatives that are ongoing that I've witnessed.
You said it's just a little taste, but even that little taste, I lived through it as a civilian here, and I still feel very overwhelmed by everything that happened because thankfully there is so much that is happening. So maybe we can help a little bit to break it down. First and foremost, what are the greatest needs that we've seen either from the beginning of the war, and what are the needs today? How have the needs evolved?
Okay, that's a very important question. I think some of the immediate needs in the days following the war had to do with housing, food, soldiers who didn't have the supplies that they needed, neither to defend themselves nor to eat properly, sleep properly, that sort of thing. And that's why what I described was people reaching into their own closets. It was before we were able to get incredible donations from abroad. Of course, diaspora jewelry really came in so strong. But those first days, it was before anyone could reach us. Planes weren't coming in, and that sort of thing. 5-year-old hostages who are coming back from Gaza. I mean, what are you talking about? Who has ever dealt with that? All of their friends who knew them in their kindergarten class, every single child there. And besides that, the whole country, even if you didn't have a personal connection to anybody who was fighting or anybody who was killed, which, by the way, there's almost nobody who doesn't have a personal connection to somebody who was very intimately affected by this. But ongoing psycho-emotional support is going to be something very important. That brings me to actually an incredible story that I'd like to highlight for a second. Sderot, which is a place I've mentioned now a couple of times in the South. The people of Sderot are people who have lived through the threat of rockets now for many, many years. So they have a resilience center in Sderot, run by an incredible woman named Ayala, and the family who I babysit for, the mother, Shira Miyuchas, she also works there. This is how I came to find out about them originally. Okay, so Sderot has this resilience center that works emotional support for trauma and that sort of thing, but also some preemptive type work, how to build resilience, because they've been living under terror for many, many years before this terrorist incursion of October 7th. And so, I mean, this is just incredible. Even with the ongoing, immediate, deep need of Sderot's own residents, Sderot is currently exporting its resilience program to places around the world that are affected by this conflict. Because as we know, Jews around the world are suffering now, not only from the devastation of October 7th that rocked their world, but increases in anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitic acts. And so State Road is actually exporting trauma support right now, which is just unbelievable, isn't it? So that's one of the main things I'd put my finger on. Besides that, we will continue to need agricultural support unless and until we bring in more foreign workers. We will need help rebuilding the South. And this is something that I'm very passionate about, and I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. One of the things I'm excited to see is how all the summer programs that are going to come here this summer are going to take part in rebuilding communities in the South. I'm talking physical fixtures need to be rebuilt so that people who want to can move back. And besides that, we need to enliven the communities there. I think that we'll all need to think about, can we make our homes in the South so that it will flourish and those communities can come back stronger than ever. Trauma support, other kinds of psychological support, agricultural support so that we can continue to sustain ourselves, support for rebuilding the South. Those are some of the main things that come to mind.
I think something very interesting that you keep mentioning is about the South. There's a lot of focus on the South, but we know there's also things happening in the North, that we have evacuees from the North as well. So how does South, North, are there differences? Are there different needs for different communities, let's say?
That's right. You're absolutely right with that question. And unfortunately, not enough attention has been paid to residents of the North. And I even have cousins living up north who aren't part of the group of people who are being officially supported by the government in their move because they're 2 kilometers outside of the, whatever it is, 9-kilometer range from the border that's being supported. I'm not sure what the exact number is that's being supported, but they're 2 kilometers away from it. So they're still under constant fire, which is very scary. They have little children. Their oldest was just bat mitzvah. She's 12 years old. So you're absolutely right to ask this question. In terms of the kind of support for evacuees, the practical needs are the same, right? People need to be housed, and they might need help with schooling for their kids and occupation and that sort of thing that they've been uprooted from. Fortunately, we didn't witness the same kind of mass terrorist incursion in the North as we did in the South. And so people meant just, I was in Be'eri and Kfar Aza, and I saw that the houses there, if people want to return to them, are not inhabitable, most of them. So there is a difference there, because in the North, God willing, there will always be something to return to. And in the South, that's not necessarily the case. Now, I imagine both populations are suffering from a similar, that many people would be suffering from a similar fear of returning, or even if it's not necessarily a fear of returning, maybe you've moved somewhere else now where you're simply not living under fear and you prefer that. Some like villages have been entirely relocated into other villages who have incorporated them because they prefer that kind of communal living to city living. And who knows, maybe we'll see new villages spring out of this because people have become comfortable where they are. I hope that those from the North will not have the same kind of need for trauma care as people from the South, only because we know that what people from the South went through is unlike anything else that we've ever seen. And so I hope that that would never be repeated in such a way that other people would have that same need. But of course, living under threat of rocket fire and foreign militaries, hostile militaries being very close to your home is a similar sort of thing. So the difference might be that we need to start speaking about residents from the North a little bit more the same way we're speaking about residents from the South and paying attention to their needs.
And hopefully not. Hopefully we won't get to that point. That'd be very nice to not get to a point where we have to worry about that. One of the things you had mentioned when we were talking prior to this conversation, you had mentioned a friend of yours who was working on vegan food for those who need that particular niche. And it really made me take a step back when you had shared that with me to go, there are some of the very big needs. And then there are real needs that just don't get the same attention, that people don't hear as much about. So where do niche needs fit in? What are some of the interesting ones?
Yeah, it happens to be that this particular sector of specialized dietary needs has been such an interesting one to watch play out, because I'm in different Jerusalem community chats and I've seen somebody asking for donations so that he could make I forget exactly what it's called. It's not tofu exactly. It's some other kind of specialized jerky to give protein to vegetarian soldiers. Okay, so just the most incredible thing. And as you made reference to, my friend's mom, Naomi Friedman, so she took over the vegan dessert needs of the army, because who is thinking about that? You know, the fact that there are vegan soldiers who, by the way, you can't just, not that we would want people to do this, but you can't necessarily just suck it up and eat meat because you're at war. If you haven't eaten meat in a long time, that would make you sick and that sort of thing. And of course, even if that happened in the very first days of the war, we want everybody who's serving to be able to be comfortable and have their needs met. Yeah, so she took over vegan desserts for the army. So every vegan in the army has her to thank for that. I really think that what I was saying about civil society was true here too. And here, the secret hero of this war, of course, was WhatsApp. Maybe Telegram too. I'm not on there. But this is where we find out in so many of these Jerusalem chats, somebody writes, is anybody driving to X place tomorrow? I have glasses, prescription glasses that need to be dropped off for somebody. This is something one of my friends was also working on towards the beginning of the war. Her mom's an optometrist, and her company took care of providing free glasses for soldiers who would need it. So my friend Nicole was working on this in the early days as well. My friend Maira was working on putting together packages for soldiers. So all of these niche needs we heard about through WhatsApp group chats. Somebody's brother, you would have this forwarded. I personally know, I can personally attest, it's my brother's best friend's uncle, something like that. But by the time it's been forwarded to you, it's 50 people later. So you have no idea whose brother's best friend's uncle this is. But if you have that resource, you're going there.
Is there one initiative in particular that's either been a revelation for you or has really touched you personally?
I think I've been thinking a lot and looking on in awe at a lot of the kinds of populations who might have fallen through the cracks, but because of the very strong attitude of volunteerism that's going on right now, and that's recognizing the validity of the needs of every individual, no matter how a person is related to this war and that sort of thing. So I think it's been inspiring to see somebody writes over WhatsApp, there's a 12-year-old boy from such and such place in the South who's getting cancer treatments, and now he's been moved to Jerusalem. And he has 6 siblings, so his parents aren't able to stay with him overnight. Is anybody able to join him? And you just know that within 3 seconds, 5, 10, 15 people have written to whoever sent that message, how can I go and visit that boy? And then maybe there will be pictures to that group chat later in the day of how happy he was and that sort of thing. There are elderly people there are Holocaust survivors, for crying out loud, who are alone in their apartments. And even if maybe they don't have somebody fighting in the war, they're scared and they're lonely and they need companionship. And I think it could be very easy for those kinds of needs to fall through the cracks at this time because of the ways that some of these other needs seem immediate. But you know what? Those are immediate needs as well. And people have been stepping up to the plate. And that time period passed when people could afford to give up their full-time work and be a full-time volunteer. And yet, many, not only young people, but I've really seen this from young people, are still making sure that this kind of contribution is a part of their daily life here.
If you were to describe more succinctly, let's say, as a takeaway on civil society and what it's giving to Israeli society, what would you say?
Civil society has been the heart and the power of our response to October 7th, and it will be the heart and the power going forward for many years to come of rehabilitation efforts and of bringing this country not only back to where it was, but hopefully far beyond that in terms of unity and our success in every sector. We unfortunately were in a period of tremendous political strife and division before the war came, and the initiatives of civil society have been at the heart of transcending those divides. And so I can only hope, while I hope that the government catches up in every way to the initiatives that civil society has put forth, whether it's by funding initiatives that were started in civil society or supporting them in other ways, we know, unfortunately, what government will look like in many ways. Elections are going to come and go, etc. But the actions of everyday people, the unity of everyday people with their neighbors, and the hearts and vision of everyday people here in Jerusalem, in the north, in the south, people who choose to continue making their life here and participating in any part of society that they're involved in, will be the reason that this project of Jewish autonomy in our ancestral homeland will last, as opposed to the other two times in our history of exile that we have had autonomy. It's very scary to be at this 75-year point and see what's happened and the way that we are so on the brink. And when we're reminded of those historical examples, some people think, maybe we're not going to make it to the 100-year mark. We are going to make it, and it's going to be because of how civil society has overcome and transcended the events of October 7th.
Yes. Plain and simple yes to everything you just said. You mentioned the strife and division, and one of the things I felt during this period is an incredible sense of unity and coming back together. And the same way that the heaviness has been palpable on the streets, that unity and that we are all one country, one nation has also been palpable. So what has been your experience along those lines?
Absolutely. And I think that's the most important thing, is that unity. And I hope that we can hold on to it. Of course, it took a tragedy to unite us. I hope that in the future it will be mutual celebration that continues to unite us, and mutual triumph that unites us, and nothing to do with a common enemy.
If you had to take one summary, one bottom line, what is the biggest impact that civil society has had on Israel today?
We just wouldn't have a society anymore if civil society hadn't responded in those first days and weeks after October 7th. The needs that I described, it was not like somebody needed a birthday cake because they had just come from the South and they forgot to bring one for their child's birthday or didn't get a chance to. Okay, those are some of the things we've been doing in the months since. And I think that those were extremely important, if not crucial, for the emotional continuance and our ability to persevere and be resilient. But in those first days, we're literally talking about a roof over people's head, food to eat, equipment for our soldiers. It's actually terrifying. There's no such thing as thinking about what society would have looked like without civil society response, because it's not something you want to imagine. The government was not equipped to deal with all fronts, and they had to put their stock into the military in those first days. And that's the thing that you and I can't do. We don't know anything about it, and we can't help besides for bringing socks to soldiers. But every other aspect of daily living in Israel was entirely in the hands of civil society, and it is thanks to the people who volunteered, continued living here, and believed that we would continue, that there's an Israel to talk about today, and that there's an Israel to talk about in 100 years.
I love that you just put into words what I've been seeing, but I'm always curious how to put it into words. So thank you for putting it into words. Very important. Any major takeaways or anything else that you want our listeners to hear from you?
Well, thank you for that opportunity and for the opportunity of being on here today and getting to highlight some of the work that I've been fortunate to witness. I think that I'd like people to remember some of these needs that Israel will continue to have going forward, and ask that same question that everybody's been asking and that civil society in Israel asked itself. How can I, from my particular place, contribute? I think one of the big takeaways is that we don't all have to be Superman. We don't all have to go out and figure out how to use a gun or how to become the next prime minister, right? For most of us, we're going to look and say, I have a job, or maybe I'm 10 years old and I go to school every day, or maybe I'm a grandmother and I can crochet. What resources, skills, and interests and capacities do I have that enable me to contribute? And try to stay plugged in to hearing from the people who need the most help. What are the needs? And And then we need to continue to do. And I think we all need to look towards one of the greatest ways to strengthen Israeli society is to come and be a part of it, take part from the heart of civil society here itself. And if that's not something you're able to do now, there are many, many practical ways to support the people here, especially the people with ongoing needs. Farmers, people with businesses, entrepreneurs from the South, all of that stuff is online now. You can buy from them. You can buy produce, you can buy wine, you can buy jewelry. There are many very practical ways to continue to support the livelihoods and continuation, getting back to everyday life that's going to be happening here. And there is some way for every single person to contribute. And if you can't find it, then reach out to me and I'll find the right WhatsApp group for you. I'll find the right spreadsheet. We'll talk about how to get you over here to Israel and make a life here where you're part of this incredible tapestry of civil society where everybody has a part and everybody has a place, and then we all come together, hopefully, at the end of the day and look at this work and the country that we've built, and we know that it was by our own hands and our own strength that we came together and persevered through this time period.
I love the way you put things, and I think you're going to give a great answer to our last question. What is giving you hope today?
I'm filled with hope that so many people who could have left chose to stay here during a time of war. I'm filled with hope and shed a tear or two when I see those videos of planefuls of Israelis who were trekking in Peru, who chartered a plane and flew back to a country in the middle of war. It's the only place where people fly during war instead of trying to get out, which of course happened as well, and that's completely understandable. Those are some of the things that bring me hope. Planning for the future here, it can feel totally dissonant when I'm trying to make plans for next year when we're still in the middle of a war and I'm thinking, oh, am I going to go to school? Am I going to work? What am I going to do? But that's part of the hope of living here, that there's going to be a next year and that there's going to be mundanity, God willing. Everyday life, we're going to have some of that. I'm thinking about where I want to live, that kind of thing. But ultimately, it really comes back to that story that I told at the very beginning of my family from Sderot who's thinking about moving back there. Not just the fact that they might actually move back and so, oh, great, we're reviving these villages and that sort of thing. It's really not that. It's the fact that they would. It's the fact that they have hope. People who went through a lot more than I ever went through, who've looked evil in the face. The fact that mothers who have lost their sons come and tell the rest of us, do not despair. I had the great fortune of meeting the mother of one of our hostages who was tragically killed by friendly fire, Yotam Chaim. I met his mother, Iris, before he was killed. I've never met a more amazing woman. I met her in the back room of a television channel that she was about to go on at the same time as the deputy mayor. And I asked her, what's the single most important thing that any of us could do to contribute? I hadn't officially become a citizen yet at the time. I was just here. And she said to me, become a citizen, move to Israel. And I thought to myself, if this woman who is going through hell can be full of hope and can look me in the eye and say, the project of Zionism is alive and well, and it is my cause, and it is your cause, and we are a people, and we will survive this, then I can certainly be hopeful about the next 100 years in Israel.
That was beautiful. I think we could have many more conversations, and you're welcome to come back whenever you'd like. But thank you, Maayan, for being with us today. Thank you to Nomi Studios for helping us put this on today. And thank you to all of you listening at home. We'll be coming out with many more episodes, meeting people who are part of different initiatives as a part of civil society. If you have questions for them, you can find us across social media. Make sure to follow and subscribe wherever you're listening to podcasts, and we'll see you on the next episode.